The motion tracker signaled its update. The device, which reported on the movements based on both the planet's own axis and its orbit around the star, indicated that darkness would soon fall. He felt the need to hurry. Although his experiments alongside this colossal mass of fluid substance were nearing completion, a little rest before the final night's work would be beneficial. He was starting to feel tired now. Compared to the standards of his own world, it had been quite a long time to spend alone. Fortunately, his mission was almost over. There was only one more planet left to examine. Then it would be time to return home. The fourth-level researcher of the Exoplanetary Tracking Institute glanced over the devices in his makeshift field laboratory. It wouldn't take long to pack up. The transfer of the data he had collected so far was already complete. Once he sent the results of the final study and the ultimate mission evaluation, his activities on this planet would come to an end. The results he had obtained so far had shown that a surprise during the night was impossible, but the rules were clear. He gathered the materials on the edge of the fluid mass and, boarding his vehicle, set off. He preferred to travel on the ground as long as the terrain allowed. One never knew when energy would be needed. Upon reaching the campsite, he saw that everything was in its place, which reassured him. There were no life forms on the planet he had examined that could harm his materials, but the memory of the incidents he had experienced in previous missions was enough to make him cautious. He had lost count of the number of planetary systems he had visited. It will take time to gather the findings, he thought. He knew he would need all the information he had acquired in the study of life forms in the galaxy when he returned. He was about to drift off into thoughts about home when he snapped back to attention. He tried to focus on his mission, knowing he would have enough spare time during the journey. It was actually a job very similar to what he had done before. The aim was to confirm the methods followed by life forms for their development. He would repeat the study with simple life forms this time, after working with relatively more complex species. He had confined 2 different organisms in a controlled experimental environment with stable environmental conditions. The conditions that could be considered perfect for one species could only provide the minimum conditions for survival for the other. He had devised 2 separate systems with opposite environmental arrangements, and tonight he would obtain the results. He glanced at the motion tracker, forgoing rest to complete the final preparations before the journey. When everything was done, he saw that it was time for the check. He inspected the necessary protective equipment, prepared the recording devices, and activated both systems. The outcome was no different from what he had seen before. In the environment, apart from a few members of the advantaged species, no other life remained. As he watched the events from the records, he saw that the same scenario played out. The advantaged species had spread in such a way as to leave no room for the other species to survive. They had continued to multiply until they completely depleted the resources, and when there was no food left in the environment, they had tried to survive by destroying their own individuals. At the end of the experiment, a few members still surviving were striving to reproduce and spread. However, the nutrients provided in the setup could have sustained the organisms in the environment for perhaps tens of times longer than anticipated. He decided not to spend any more time on this matter. From the most primitive forms living within the fluid mass spread across the majority of the planet to the most advanced species obtaining their needs from the energy of the star and the materials on the solid surface, their behavior was all the same. He had been fascinated by the diversity of life on the planet since his arrival, but his studies had shown that all this diversity had originated from a common primitive form. They all behaved in the same way: reproduce, thrive, and dominate. It was time to leave now. Inside the spacecraft, he didn't need the protective clothing required on the planet's surface. If only it weren't so cumbersome, and if I could take it off during rest times, he thought. First, he freed the extensions at the ends of his arms, which served both as sensors and manipulators. Then, he removed the protective gear from each of his 6 arms. When he shed the single piece encasing his torso, he stood still, savoring the moment for a while. After a successful liftoff, he was recording the final report in the spacecraft heading towards the last destination. From the most primitive to the most advanced, they are all programmed in the same way. They try to ensure the continuity of their species by reproducing. There is no limit or goal. continuous struggle seems to have led to an increase in the diversity of life. None of the organisms have the power to dominate the entire planet. If this balance is maintained, I can say that there is no risk for the diversity of life on other planets or on their own worlds. On the other hand, mutations are highly likely and variable. If any species undergoes a mutation that allows it to develop faster than others, it poses a serious threat to the diversity of life and the balance of the planet. Depending on the type of development and mutation, a species that could become a problem not only for their own planet but also for the entire galaxy could emerge. It would be beneficial for the Institute to keep this planet under surveillance and closely monitor the development of life. Although intervention may not be necessary once they start to pose a threat to themselves, it is imperative if they acquire the ability to reach other planets. As the blue planet he was departing from gradually diminished, the tiny red dot that was his destination began to appear. He was rapidly heading towards the fourth rocky planet in the system.